Have them sign off on the classification.
Now it would be recorded, I guess, for the record. My name is Antoine Coe. I'm here on behalf of dairy farmers in Manitoba.
Wait till we get this. Wait till we get this finished. The meeting started.
Okay.
Then we'll get you going.
Okay.
You ready? Call the meeting to order. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we are in Treaty 1 territory and traditional homeland of the Métis Nation. I'll introduce the panel members. To my left is Ron Merritt. To my far left is Ed Sawatsky. I'm Marcel Larondo. I'll be chairing. The assessor today, we'll have Jeremy Poole over here and Svenas Shavel. And our administrative assistant today will be Belen Rojo. We'll be hearing applications for revision of assessment roll in accordance with the Municipal Act. The matters for which revision is requested have been described in each application. And we will limit the discussions to those matters. Statements that applicants or the assessor make at this hearing are sworn testimony, and anyone speaking to the matter must be sworn in. Be advised that comparisons of assessment of properties are not considered evidence of market value by the Board of Revision. The Board of Revision is appointed annually by Council and is independent of it and the City Administration. It makes its decisions on the basis of the evidence provided at this hearing and issues a written order that will be mailed to all parties as soon as possible. Please note the Board's decision with respect to an application may be appealed to the Manitoba Municipal Board if the matter pertains to assessed value or classification, or the Court of Queen's Bench if the matter pertains to application of exemption from taxation. Should you wish to appeal, information on how to do so will be included with the Board order. With respect to the hearing process, I will confirm the matters to be addressed with each applicant following the swearing in. We will then have the assessor's testimony followed by questions that the applicant may have, and then the applicant's testimony followed by questions. Each side will have an opportunity to summarize if they wish. Once all the evidence about an application has been brought forward, the applicant may leave. The process will repeat for each item on the docket today, and the session will close after all the applications have been heard, and the Board will deliberate in private and make its decisions. You will receive the order by registered mail as soon as possible. As information, all public hearings are live streamed, recorded, and will be part of the public record. If you have a cell phone, please put it on silent. You want to swear them in, please?
Please state your full name.
Jeremy Ryan.
And you said the evidence about presented the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth to help you God?
I do.
Thank you. Okay, just swear in or affirm?
Sure.
Okay. Please state your full name.
Antoine Francois Coe.
And you swear the evidence about presented the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth to help you God?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. Do you have any evidence that you want to share with them?
I have law. That's not really evidence. It's the extract of the Municipal Assessment Act.
Do you have copies of it, or
I do.
okay, for us?
Yes.
Or she'll just pass it out to us?
It's not really evidence, but
This is part
It
of
is.
the argument of the class liability.
Hmm?
I received no brief from the appellant, so as far as class and liability is allowed to present any argument for that, but no actual evidence for the quantum in this instance.
So we've got you marked down that we'll be dealing with classification,
And
liability, and the amount of the assessed value. Is that correct? I'm going to be going with him first, and then you can.
yeah, I indicated prior to the hearing starting that the classification, the request for revision was being withdrawn.
Okay.
The only two live issues are liability to taxation and quantum. This is a section 14.2, so it's the very first time that both those issues are put on the roll. The quantum and the liability to school taxation is the very first time it's been on the roll.
Okay, we'll deal with it as we move along then. I'll get you to sign off after. When you're ready, Jeremy.
If we're doing class and liability,
Hmm?
he goes first.
Oh, that's
We're
right.
maintaining that it's class code 60 taxable. I received no information from the appellant other than a request that under 20 3.1C, that they want an exemption from school taxes. Aside from that, I have no information coming my
Okay,
way.
so we'll have Mr. Hackle go first. You're up first, Mr. Hackle.
Yes, so I've had initially started communications with Jeremy's superiors on the whole issue of liability and taxation, because it's the first time school taxation is imposed on this particular tenant. Dairy Farmers Manitoba is the owner of a parcel of land on which the building is located. The exemption which Jeremy spoke of, which I brought to the assessment department, its attention and to their legal department, and they were hoping to get some kind of a position to be prior to the hearing, was an exemption which is highlighted in front of you and is limited to school tax. It references an exemption for an agricultural society as far as school tax. And Dairy Farmers of Manitoba is a not-for-profit organization which is incorporated. It, in that sense, representing dairy, dairy is a sector of agriculture. So we're saying on behalf of the dairy farmers that we meet the criteria of agriculture. The second part is agricultural society. There's actually agricultural societies throughout the province which regroup people with common interest. They're not necessarily agricultural. Dairy Farmers in Manitoba is one of those. It represents all the farmers, dairy farmers, and their common interest in this province as a not-for-profit group. They're controlled by the dairy farmers. They represent the dairy farmers' interest. And it was based on that explanation which I had provided to the assessment department and which I'm providing to this board today, that we maintain that we should continue to be school tax exempt.
And are you speaking to quantum, to the assessed value as well?
Oh, the assessed value would be the assessor's burden. I may have some questions on that.
We're just doing the class or liability.
Do you have any questions of the appellant?
You have two options to gain this. You can go through an apply to the department. If you haven't applied to the department, you're choosing to do it at appeal. I received no information other than what you presented here today. So I'm fairly limited on what I can review, given that I have no real information in front of me. I'll just blatantly say, you're claiming that they're a society. I went through the Manitoba Business Information Service through the province of Manitoba. They indicate that they're a board. I also went through the Manitoba Association of Agricultural Societies website and contacted one of their executives. They don't indicate that you're a member of their establishment. So if they're not, where would you be defining this as a society if you're not with Manitoba Association of Agricultural Society as a member?
I'll do my best to try and answer that maybe with more clarity. I tried to address it in my initial presentation. Was that I did explain that there are agricultural societies which join together as a group and talk to each other. And I explained we are not part of that, but I explained that the definition of those two terms, agricultural, number one, dairy is part of that, and society is defined in any dictionary, whether you go to a legal dictionary or a regular dictionary, as a grouping of people with a common interest, which may be incorporated and may not be incorporated. Ours happens to be incorporated. So we're of the view that just because some of these societies get together as a group and register in that grouping of societies, the tail doesn't wag the dog. Either you are agricultural and we're dairy, and either you're a grouping of people with a common interest or you're not. And just because you choose or not to be part of that grouping of societies. It shouldn't make a difference under the legislation.
Any further questions?
I have nothing really to question as there's no real evidence presented, just the statement that he needs.
Ed, any questions?
Yeah, a couple. So why have you not made an application to assessment for school tax exemption? Because they have forms to fill out and information to provide.
Well, we were in active discussions, both with legal and maybe we didn't actually fill out a form, Mr. Board Member. But nobody, Kalen Bomback at the Civil Legal Services was dealing with it and wasn't requesting the formality of a form being filled out. So that's why we didn't. We were having productive discussions, but with the Christmas holidays and this coming as quickly as it did right after the Christmas holidays, I had got an email from Ms. Bomback saying, well, listen, we just can't deal with it now, we'll deal with it when we come back, and we haven't been able to touch together. I've been in court for 2 days. I didn't receive any messages from her, but that's why I didn't feel we needed to file a formal form.
May I just interject for a second? Were you dealing with our legal representative on the Red River Exhibition Association, or were you dealing with the dairy farmers in Manitoba?
It was both. Yeah. Because the issues are the same. There's been some changes to 2 roles here. As I started to explain, Red River X also had a number of Section 42 changes made, and a lot of the issues are the same. The school tax issue is the same for Red River, and the school tax issue is the same for dairy farmers. Both were added to school tax.
Are they both falling under this rule?
The principal role is with Red River.
With Red River?
And this one here is the dairy farmers Manitoba owns the building. The line itself is still owned by Red River.
Yeah.
My other question was, you highlighted item C under 23.1, and it says incorporated agricultural society. And it sounds like you're talking about incorporated and unincorporated societies.
Well, I've indicated that some are not incorporated.
Yes.
But the Dairy Farmers of Manitoba is incorporated.
But you're not a member of an agricultural incorporated society.
Well, we are incorporated, and we are agricultural because we're dairy, and we are a
I see,
society.
that's how you're applying that. Okay, that's all my questions, thank you.
Ron?
I have no questions, Mr. Chairman.
When did they change the taxation on this? It was exempt before, correct?
And it was by way of notice. I thought it would be part of the record that would have been filed here, but the notice was dated September 3rd, 2018.
I have it here. I didn't, the date would be.
I'm sorry?
I have it here. If you need to see.
Yeah, I've got it here now too.
Yeah, September 20 of
Was there a reason given, or?
Well, it just shows on here that it's been changed. Section 42, or 14.2 changes did 2 things. They added 2.770 or 2,077,000.
We added the building to
The building, and they changed the school tax. So it did 2 things in that notice.
Okay. I guess now we can deal with the value, is that correct? Let's deal with the value, and you start on that, I think, right?
Yes.
I don't want to see that again. Keep it in there. When you're ready, Jeremy.
Roll number is 075691365570. Specific address is 4055 Portage Avenue. The owner is Red River Exhibition Association. The roll year is 2019. Assessed value for $2,770,000. the classification of class code 60 and taxable for liability, as we already discussed. The building was built in approximately 2013. It is 15,895 square feet. It's one story. The following page shows the aerial view of the property. The site was developed on an existing roll. The land itself is still maintained or owned by Red River. The building, from my understanding, is owned by the dairy farmers. Go to page 2, page 3, page 4. It just shows the pictures of the property, and so on until we come to page 9. So that's the last page of the interior photo of the property. So it gives you a good understanding of the property. There's a lab, there's testing, mainly office, and a little bit of storage. Page 10 is the lease, indicating that there is a 10-year lease with option to use for another 10 years. And rent, we're not gonna, any rent at all, we're not taking the rent from the lease, we're taking the rent from the marketplace. As well. Page 13 shows the location according to the plans that was submitted to property development. Page 14 is the site layout. It's on approximately 85,000 square feet of land. And as you can see from the photos, it looks like there is potential for future, or at least designed in a way for future development. If you go back to the aerial photo on page 2, you can see how there was looks to be like the ability to expand to the left and to the north. And there is a subdivision that's going on in front of it, that's class code 60, that's underway. So it looks like this property is the first of an initial group of properties that can be developed or will be developed for this parcel of land. Page 16 is the layout of the building. Office space, the lab is in the interior, boardroom. Page 17 is a little bit of a blow-up of the lab itself. Page 18 are the comparables that we used. This property is situated basically on the edge of the perimeter. There won't be a lot of comparables that we'll be able to bring in from, just because of the location. So we went citywide. I brought in a populace of minimum rents 50. I could have brought in more. At this point, 50 was enough of a populace to indicate that a $13 approximate rent is appropriate to apply to this property. We have an average rent of $13.26 a square foot. The weighted average is $13.28 a square foot, and the subject on the roll is receiving $13.16 a square foot. So our workup for the property is on page 19. There is approximately, like I said, 15,895 square feet with an average rent of $13.16 applied to the property, which produces a potential revenue or potential gross income of $209,144. When we apply our 7% vacancy, the effective gross income is $194,504. When we apply our expenses at 7% and our shortfall at $7, the net operating income is reduced to $173,100. We're taking a capitalization rate of 6.25% and applied it to the property, or applied it to the NOI to get to $2,770,000. Page 20 is just another, it's one income stream, so it just shows the income stream as well. The capitalization rate we chose is approximately, or is 6.25, and that is right in the percentile where a new property should be, between 5.5 and 6.75, and in line with market. So, based on that, I think it's a reasonable assessment. I think it's easily dependable. It's right in the wheelhouse of market. It's a newer building. Capitalization rate or reflection of risk. I believe that 6.25 is reasonable to buy this property. So $2,770,000 should be maintained. Open questions.
Thank you. Questions, Mr. Echo?
Yes. Just to let the panel know where I'm going. I'm going to be suggesting to this witness because the property is outside the perimeter. The comparables that he's chosen aren't really good, and that the cap rate should be a bit higher. So along that line, are there any of your comparables that are zoned agricultural, Jeremy?
No, I do not think so.
But this property is.
We're treating it as a regular office building. As far as the use of the property, there's a small lab, there's some storage, but the principal of the property is office.
So if we go to, but my specific question was on the first page, you've indicated the zoning is agriculture for this property. Correct. No, none of your comparables, either in your cap rate study or the comparable study are agricultural, correct?
I didn't do the cap rate of the model study for that, but I would assume that'd be about right.
Would you classify this as suburban class B type space?
This is how we don't distinguish between suburban A or B. That suburban A or B is part of Colliers and CBREs. How they classify property, we just do OFS suburban. So we're just showing the A and the B to show the data that they're showing. So that's why you see there's no differentiation between the two rates of A or B. We don't distinguish between those two.
I know the city does, but I would suggest to you that this space is suburban B type space.
That's your position.
Do you agree?
My position is we don't differentiate between A or B. That's what the answer
Are any of your comparables outside the perimeter?
Nope. We don't collect data from outside the perimeter. Or I
So-
should say would obviously there's gonna be very little.
So to find comparables outside the perimeter, you would have a better chance of doing that if you actually went to the adjoining municipalities, such as the one that's right along the border of this property, which is Headingley.
And that's what I was kind of alluding to. We don't collect data from outside of our jurisdiction. So there's no way for me to review rental information from outside of the city's jurisdiction.
But you could call the provincial assessor to get data on similar properties in Headingley, Rosser, and McDonald.
I did not do that.
Just a question with respect to the analysis that you show at your page 19, that's your income stream calculation.
Okay.
You are allocating for 12,292 square feet rent at 13.89 a square foot.
Right.
And then you're allocating rental rate with respect to what you've put as C6 storage office. Could you explain that particular?
The storage in the lab.
Sorry?
The storage in the lab area, we reduced the rental rate down a little bit.
Okay. And where's your analysis and proof with respect to the rate to be applied to storage?
As far as the storage rent
Yes.
or lab rent,
The storage rent and lab rent.
I brought in simply square foot areas from OFS properties. whether or not this remains in a lab or storage, multiple properties have storage in it. We didn't bring in any actual storage rates, if that's what you're asking,
Okay.
or lab rates, if that's what you're asking.
But if we look at your comparables, there's a number of office spaces which are in or about, if I look, for example, the previous page, the very first comparable you have, the office space is pretty much the same as the storage space, right? You have an office space for Roblin property of 36.
If you're asking me if one of all of the 50 comparables wouldn't have an element of storage in it, it would obviously have to have some. It's pretty common that almost every single OFS or building has storage space in it when it's, I mean, that's part of an economic use of the property, it's part of the layout of a property. If you're saying that you'd like to see 50 comparables of storage areas within OFS, no, I don't have that information here. It's a nominal difference.
Well, there's two aspects to it, because there's so much storage at 3,600 square feet. Is there any other buildings in your comparables that has 3,600 square feet of storage?
I didn't differentiate between that, I already made that clear.
Can you explain by going to the diagram on page 16, which areas you included as storage and which, or whatever way you want to do it, either explain what was office and what was storage?
You see on the layout the same way I see on the layout. I haven't been in the building, I just have the pictures that we have on file and the plans that were submitted. The internal area between grid lines E and F and B.
Sorry,
The internal area between grid lines E and F.
E and F, okay. That's at the bottom?
And 4 and 8 indicate that that is the lab storage area, which is on your next page. So,
And if I did have the opportunity to visit, if I were to suggest to you that the blank space between E and going a little bit further to F,
we have
starting
file
at
photos.
3.
We have file photos, and I'm not sure where you're going with this. Are you saying that
There's more space. But you don't know for sure because you haven't been inside the building.
I haven't been inside the building, I'm going off the plans, I'm going off the field inspector that went through the property and put it on the roll. I'm going off of what we have. Maybe I should rephrase it a different way, but do you have any actual evidence that contradict what we have on the roll and what we received from PP&D?
Well, I've inspected the property.
But do you have any evidence here today to support your position that there should be a change in areas?
A visual inspection.
But no actual evidence?
Oh, I'm asking the question. I'm telling you it's a
Well, it's
visual.
gotta be based on
Right
evidence.
now, he is asking questions.
Fair enough.
Wait till he puts his evidence forward.
Just to clarify for your cap rate study, you've answered that you believe that none would be ag zoning, none would be outside the perimeter, and that you haven't collected any data from the provincial assessor for similar types of buildings in the immediately adjacent areas in Ross or Headingley and McDonald. Is that a fair summary?
Those would be nominal difference in value, but yeah, I didn't contact the provincial assessor to get any OFS type properties from outside, or outside the perimeter.
It's an interesting comment. You said there would be a nominal difference in value, but you don't have
We have a
any
marketplace in Winnipeg.
evidence. Sorry, you don't have any evidence or data from anywhere on which to base that comment.
We have a capitalization rate study that we've done for the city of Winnipeg. This falls within the jurisdiction of the city of Winnipeg. If you're saying locationally it's invalid, that's your position.
No, perhaps my question wasn't clear. My question was related to your suggestion that buildings outside the perimeter and in those periphery municipalities would have the same cap rate and the same rents, and I'm suggesting that you don't have any evidence on which to base that comment. Do you agree?
No.
With respect to the cap rate at page 21, and this is nearing the end of my questions, members of the board. The Collier's study for suburban B suggests a cap rate somewhere between 6.5 and 7.2 for suburban B buildings, correct?
Correct.
And the CBRE for that same quarter come up to higher cap rates of 7 to 7.5 for suburban B.
And that's what they have reported.
And the Stevenson Advisors average, without distinction between the categories, is 6 to 7, correct?
That's what's reported, yes.
Those are all my questions.
Ron, do you have any questions?
Yeah. Mr. Paul, you've evaluated the subject property on an income basis?
Correct.
Okay. Did I hear you mention that this is on leased land?
Yes.
So, so I guess the income approach is, put out a value of $2,770,000. So I'm just wondering how the value includes the building and the land
Correct. The residual.
in the income approach?
Correct.
So, so how do you, what happens to this building after the lease expires?
Well, there's a 20-year, there's a 10-year lease plus another 10-year lease, an option to renew. After that, indicated in the lease that there would have to be an agreement whether to be removal of the building or I didn't, how do I phrase it right, I didn't get the entire lease. All I got was the rent and indicating what was the terms of the lease. As far as what happens afterwards, that's not really how we would be valuing. We'd be valuing it based on the 20-year of income that the property would generate. So, as whether year 21 the building, something else happens to it, someone would buy it based on the 20 years of leasehold interest of what that property could generate. So that's what we'll be looking at.
Okay, I thank you, Mr. Paul. Thank you.
We're not just valuing simply a building, and we're valuing the income that it could produce, and we have a 20-year horizon, and it's just starting at the beginning. So that cap rate risk is nominal versus if you were to be purchasing it at the end, where that there may be something happening to that, where you only receive a couple years of income and then something happening.
So, as the applicant has stated, would there be a increase in the cap rate in regards to being outside the perimeter? And you probably can't really tell it because all your information is inside the perimeter.
I didn't do the study, I didn't do the model.
Yeah.
What they're
But
very-
it's restricted to inside the Winnipeg
What I'm saying
properties,
is
eh?
if the perimeter is this, there are gonna be a few buildings outside of
Yeah.
that, but how many have sold and how many were included, I couldn't say.
Okay.
There'd be a nominal amount of inventory outside the actual physical.
So do you think, in your wisdom, do you think that the cap rate should be a little higher outside the perimeter?
No, what I'm looking at here is, although it doesn't show it, right in front of this property, there's a large development of Glasgow with 60 properties. There's gonna be new development. This is on the edge of that. There's a market that's developing here. They're here a few years before that. But as you can see, the whole section's being divided up so that it can facilitate that. So when I'm looking at this, I'm looking at cap rate, I'm looking at risk. What's the risk to the income stream? What's the risk of the potential purchaser and the income that's gonna be generated on it? You see a developing market here. You see everywhere else in the city, where could you get a lower rate? You see a building that is fairly new, 2013, you're not gonna be able to anticipate any future costs that versus buying a building, say 1960, 1970, 1980, that you have to put in. You have a 30-year horizon here that most buildings we work with wouldn't need any more income put in from the owner. So on for the next foreseeable future, this is a fairly low risk. So we would have to reflect that in the cap rate. And the cap rate we've chosen is right in between what the standard board is.
So one final question. I know it was built in 13. Is there a building permit? Do you know offhand what it costs to build?
I didn't look into it.
Okay, okay. I thank you.
Okay?
Yeah, maybe in a different way, can you give me the factors that you considered in setting the cap rate?
Well, location.
Location.
In this
Okay.
case here, it's an improving location.
Yeah, okay.
It's right on the edge of True North development, the Auto Parks development, the MTS Iceplex.
Got that
The
one.
MTS Iceplex now, yes.
Okay. What other factors? The age of the building?
They're correct, the age of the building. If you're buying an older building, you may have to invest more money back into it.
Right.
This is a newer building, you wouldn't have to foresee that. We would also look at what your marketplace is as far as rent. We're developing right in front of this. We didn't have it included in this brief. We're developing right in front of this, and this is the subject property. This is the whole development that's coming in, and this is Auto Park off to the side.
What page is that one?
This is on my rebuttal information for the class liability. I didn't submit it because basically there was no real evidence as far as just openly stating that it's society, so we didn't submit it, but you can have it now if you like. It's on the last page. You can have it at the penalty.
Okay, so it's three factors. It's the low risk because of the new market development in the area, the age of the building, and what you call marketplace rent.
Right.
Those are the three factors.
If you're looking if we're taking this on market value as a tenant, where would you go in the city that you could achieve, where you'd be able to achieve below a $13 rate? We have a list of comparables that average out at around 13, a little over 13. So we're taking the marketplace and simply putting it in on the subject property. It's well supported.
I understand, thank you. No further
Can you
questions.
pass those down to us, what you're at today?
Just on the last page shows the subdivision that's going in front of the property, which will all link up, obviously, if it's laid out. So, this is all class code 60 going in.
And this is all Red River property, correct?
It was subdivided up until different roll numbers, but it's all Red River property.
But they continue to own the land, do they not? Is there any other of the properties that are being taxed in this same format within their area on the Red River properties?
I believe Dairy Farmers was the first one, and as far as the subdivision goes in, my understanding is all class code 60.
So they would have been aware of that under the development agreement, correct?
As far as reviewing the other properties, I took a brief review, but I didn't go into detail of the other properties as they're not under the field. I'm just doing this property unto itself. So when I'm looking at this property, it's occupied by dairy farmers in Manitoba. They're not, in my opinion, a society. They're not registered with Manitoba Association of Agricultural Society. So there'd be class code 60 taxes.
So had Kalen been in touch with you then, the lawyer?
Been in touch with me from legal on this property, no.
I thought-
That's why I was asking whether it was done through Kaylin on Red River Expedition,
Yeah.
which may have happened, or probably did happen, but I'm not aware of the details. But if you were not contacting our legal based on dairy farmers in Manitoba, it wouldn't have been reviewed, I would think. If you're looking at the large parcel that was, it was under discussion, this smaller roll number, which we have under appeal today, most likely wasn't included in that conversation.
The exhibition grounds are under exemption, aren't they?
I believe so, yes.
Because they're agricultural, correct?
I believe so, yes.
But it's not a society.
No, I believe, I don't wanna get into another roll number, because that's not under appeal, I didn't review it, but I
But
believe.
it's part of the same holdings is why the only reason I'm going there is they're part of the same holdings, correct?
If you're looking at it that way, but what I'm looking at from as far as if you look at the package that I sent you, or that you have, we're looking at under the first page, 11.2 and 11.3 indicate that we are to do it under the occupier of the property, which are dairy farmers in Manitoba. So Red River exhibition is not in the equation. So it's like if I have a large property and I have a legitimate exemption, if I have a tenant that comes in, they don't get my exemption. They'd have to be reviewed and unto themselves. Now, maybe they have or their use in the association is the exact same thing what I'm doing, and we review it, they get their own separate exemption. But in this case here, it's not.
In this case, it has not been reviewed yet.
It's not being reviewed now, but I mean, it was never applied for, as far as I'm aware of. That's why I asked in the meeting why they should just apply, you don't have to do this under appeal. And then whatever the outcome of that is, you could appeal that. I have no real information other than the Illinois police stating that they're incorporated and a society, agricultural society, so we want to exempt. But no other information other than that. There's nothing here to go on.
Okay, we'll get on to Mr. Hepler's presentation.
Thank you.
You know what, can we just take a 2-minute break?
Absolutely.
I'll shut it off.
Okay.
Don't have too much coffee. We'll call it back to order. Mr. Echo, you've got the floor, make your presentation.
Yes, and now that I've received the rebuttal document, I do want to point out one or two things which supported what I was talking about initially on page 2. We see that confirms on the dairy farmers website that they represent the interests of the dairy farmers, and that at the very bottom, all dairy farms in the province are family owned and operated, and we finance the organization and elect a 9-member board of directors, and that's incorporated. So it's consistent with what I was explaining to this board initially. I'll address the issue of the lease. The one thing that isn't for you, and I don't think it's really material in any event, but if you wanted a little bit of an explanation as to the structure of this holding and the transaction, if you go to the top of page 12 of the assessor's first brief, page 12, the very top, and this is a more technical thing, but it's a common technique that we lawyers use to put a lease in place until the subdivision of the parcel is created, so that the person can build on that land. And you'll see at the top, the landlord is 10 years at its sole cost and expense to obtain approval and registration of the planned subdivision. Because, as the picture shows, this is basically farmland. And it needed to be subdivided and have a title. And that's a process that's going to happen, so eventually dairy farmers will become the owner of the title. So I'm on all fours really with the assessor's analysis that really we can treat dairy farmers as the owner, because number one, they have the exclusive right under what's called an option agreement, specified under this paragraph, to become the owners when that subdivision occurs. With respect to the quantum, the fact that this property is shown on page 9 of the assessor's rebuttal, was as of the effective date, which is April 1, 2016, the only kind of building in this agricultural field we say has an influence on rental rates and also on cap rates. It's not quite right to say that anything inside the perimeter is City of Winnipeg boundaries. In Centerport, for example, you have a part of Rosser that has a pretty big part of Centerport. Out by McCreary Road, I'm doing work on several different properties there, and that's RM of McDonald properties. You have a bunch of office space in that area. As you go down McGilvery towards the perimeter, a large sector of that is all RM of McDonald property. And there's a lot of office properties there which would have provided big comparables. With respect to the rental rates, there's just a couple comments.
Can I just interject? Isn't he supposed to be presenting his information, his evidence? He's presenting my evidence back to you in terms of his. Can I ask?
He's going through your evidence and showing extra actually that wasn't highlighted, which wasn't read into the record. So if he wants to do that, that's fine. It's still evidence. It's just evidence that you supplied, right?
So if we go to page 18, if we look at, that's where you get the weighted average of 13.28. I agree with the assessor that quite a few of these buildings can have a little bit of storage. but nothing to the extent, based on the buildings that I know, for example, I've been in some of the Provencher buildings, clients who do own those buildings. The storage areas are basically smaller storage areas for, you know, all your products, maybe a little bit for tenants, but it's not like the dairy farmers, their building. There's a huge storage area for all the products. They also teach courses and have a whole bunch of kits that they use for their lab testing. They need a whole bunch of products to do the testing. So they have, as we saw, at least, we disagree with that, but at least 3,600 square feet of storage, which I would say should actually bring down the price, because storage, fortunately, the assessor's right, I didn't bring any evidence, but to attribute $10 a square foot for storage outside the perimeter, I would think it is a high number. But even though we would accept that, there's using the average here at 13.16 for the is not what the assessor used on page 19. On page 19, the next page, he used for the office space 13.89. Although we say that the number is too high for properties outside the perimeter and in an open field and developed the way it is, that number should at least be brought down to, instead of 13.89, should at least be brought down to the 13.28. And I don't have, I'll admit it, any comparables to show to you, but based on my experience, and I've been doing valuation with appraisers in this industry for a long time, the 10.66 is high for a 3,600 square foot storage facility. If somebody was going to use a storage facility 3,600 square feet, there's a lot of comparables that you could pick up at a hell of a lot lower rental rate, especially for a one-story storage. Maybe if you get into the higher storages at 18 and 20-some feet, where you have a lot of value in the storage height, you might get higher rates of $8 to $9. But a one-story storage area wouldn't command $10 a square foot rates. So I'm suggesting $9 number would be appropriate for that. With respect to the cap rate, I'm saying that it's suburban B, and the city is right, it doesn't distinguish between suburban A and suburban B. But you'll see that the companies that are in the business of marketing and selling these properties do distinguish between suburban A and suburban B. And if we go to Collier's, suburban B is between 6.5 and 7.25, and CRB goes even higher than that. It says suburban B, their analysis of the sales is between 7 and 7.5. So I'm suggesting a cap rate of 7, which reflects the market. That's what we're supposed to do, is we're supposed to try and reflect the market. And for some reason, the city is not breaking out its capitalization analysis in a detailed way to actually reflect what suburban B, because it's a different type of building, commands a higher capitalization rate by investors. I agree with the assessor with respect to some of the factors on cap rate. Location is definitely a factor, and we see here the location is more kind of a speculative location. This is the only building that's been there since 2013. If it was a really active area, and we were having a lot of activity there, and there was no risk involved, you'd have a lot more buildings in there by today, May 2019, 6 years later. So it suggests that any person who's looking at buying this and leasing it out recognizes that he's in a developing area, and accordingly, it would be appropriate to put a higher risk area, a risk number than falling in the middle, as the assessor has suggested at 6.25. I think that's my evidence on the calculate. I'm not getting into or challenging the vacancy 7%, expenses 7%. My focus is more on the rental rate for standard office. If I go back to 19 in summary, I would recommend that the first number be brought down to 13.28, which is the weighted, or sorry, $13, because of the location outside the perimeter. Probably not that high, but I don't have evidence for you, so the $13 the first number, and the storage area at $9, and the cap rate at 7. That would be my recommendation.
Questions? Jeremy?
Yeah, let's start with the area. Do you have any evidence to support the change in it of you're indicating that it's 3,600 square feet total storage, or I'm looking at it, but it's from the plans, but principally of the 3,600 square feet that we have from the plans submitted from TP&D, it looks to be lab. So, do you have any evidence to actually break out the areas?
He is under oath, and he's
Yeah.
presented the information.
But he's not providing an actual plan with areas, an actual breakout.
Well, I'd
I'm just looking at the plans, and I'm looking between the grid lines, and you have 2 small rooms towards the back that look like storage.
What page are you
The
looking
rest
at?
of it on page 16, and the rest of it looks like lab. So between grid line 7, or grid lines approximately 7 and 4, and between E and F. That space in
7.
there, you can see the lab equipment area, and you see the 3 small rooms off to the side. That looks predominantly lab and little storage.
Okay, so how you access the lab area from the entrance, so the entrance is on the right-hand side?
It looks to be an entrance on
The right-hand side of page 16 in the middle, between numbers 4 and 5. So when you walk into the building, you go there,
correct.
and you hit the reception area, which is straight ahead. That is, you had a picture of that in your brief, Mr. Pohl. Then, if you look just before you would hit the reception area, you can turn right, and there's a hallway, and there you have offices. This build-out on this facility, to a large extent, is a build-out with office facing the exterior walls. So you have offices, and either offices or meeting areas on all the exterior walls, with the exception in the top left-hand side, that's actually their lunchroom. So they have a kitchen area there, and the reason why you see some tables just outside the building is in the summer what they do, because I went there in the summer, they go out, well, it wasn't summer, it was after the September notice, but when Gerald Boulay gave me the tour, he explained that that's where they go outside and have their lunches outside. So that kind of all perimeter area is office space. The access to the lab area, you're right, it falls between E and F. There's 2 long rectangular pieces there. That's kind of the lab area itself. So you walk into that particular area, and where you see those 2 long rectangular things being put inside the space. That's basically, I think you have a picture of that.
Yeah, it's basically the long hallway that they converted into storage.
It's, when you go on page 8,
Page 9 would be that long hallway.
no, page 9, that's that's part of the storage. As I said, they have page, when you look at page 9, you'll see some of the coolers. There's some of the material that they use for testing that's put in those coolers temporarily. Some of the boxes are testing material, because what Dairy Farmers does on behalf of farmers, it makes sure that every load that comes in gets tested so before it hits market. But they also have, and there's some of the boxes, I can't really tell from the pictures here, they also have an educational portion that's done for purposes of the dairy farmers. And they have a whole bunch of kits that they distribute in schools and also at fairs, like agricultural societies. They distribute those things at fairs. So, and you can see that they're not storing milk here, but they have a very large storage area and facility for all of this. Now, part of the space that you've included as lab is because of the fact they need to keep the milk cool. When you see number 8, on page 8, the bottom right-hand corner of the picture there, that white wall, in fact, behind it is a fairly large refrigeration unit. And you can see, if you flip back to 16, you recall between E and F and about 5 and 7, we saw those two long rectangular pieces. And to the left, you have that kind of a larger space that has a door that shows it open. That's the refrigeration unit. So you asked me the question, well, what's office space? Anything that is office space or used as office space is either in the perimeter walls, and have, I explained for the lunch area and the big boardroom. But what's between E and F, there's a whole kind of big open space that has no dividing areas.
I'll
show you? Yeah,
you
this
can come
big
show me
area.
here if you want.
Yeah. The big,
What I'm saying is this is storage, this is all lab, this is refrigeration. So when you're saying 3,600 square feet is all storage,
oh, no, if I stated that, I misstated myself. It's
so
between
when you're trying to get a rental rate
storage
out,
and lab. It's not finished as office space.
so predominant use is of office, and of the argument between the 3,600, is it all storage, is it lab? It's maybe 50, 60, 40 lab storage. So of the total square foot of the building, you're getting down to pretty nominal standard storage in the building.
Well, it depends what you consider storage,
On a-
because
on a-
they're storing milk in those big freezers.
On a near
Refrigerators.
16,000 square foot building, if you have 1,500 square feet of storage, give or take 1,000, maybe more, that's pretty nominal for as far as they concern what you would be able to attribute to actual rentable area for office.
Okay.
It's
well,
not out of the question, is my point.
okay. I don't think I have a question to answer on that.
Okay, so if we can get on to, unless you have any follow-up.
Well, there's, as I was explaining, all that kind of center area, and that's really unusual for any kind of office building, is not used for office space. All that center area. So I think you actually marked it off, Mr. Paul, but I think what he marked off is all this center area here is not office space. I think that's what you've marked off.
Yeah, basically the internal long hallway they converted into storage, and you have one room off to the side, which is a larger room. So, all things being said, it's predominantly office.
Well,
So-
that's where you and I disagree.
So
Based
you
on my
would-
visual inspection, there's a at least a third of the building that isn't outfitted as office space and related facilities like meeting room or kitchen.
As far as evidence for capitalization rate, do you have any evidence outside outside of the city of Winnipeg boundary?
Well, again, I haven't, you're inviting me to answer something. So, for example, just around the Prairie Road, I'm doing work for a two-story facility that's predominantly office space, and it's just outside the city perimeter. And the rate that was certified, it's in what some people refer as industrial flex, but it's outfitted as office. The rate was $7 a square foot in that building.
Let me rephrase it. You've presented no evidence of any kind for quantum. So you have no capitalization rate to present. You can give a verbal opinion,
Well,
but you have no actual evidence.
Well, I do, because part of your brief is based on.
I'm asking for your evidence, not mine,
But-
to be reworded back against the department. Do
Well,
you have any of your own submission?
my own submission is based on the CRB, which I'm aware of. I get those reports on a quarterly basis, part of my work in this area. I get CRB reports, I get the Collier's reports, and those numbers, which I get, and which I know, are also referenced in your
So
document.
you have an opinion of value, okay,
Correct.
or opinion of capitalization rate. As far as rent, you've asked me specifically, did I go outside and contact the city and contact the provincial assessor for rent information? Did you do the same? Did you bring in any evidence of rent outside or of any kind?
No, apart from the only property that I've referenced in the arm of McDonald is the one I've set at $7 a square foot. That's the only one I'm aware of. Unfortunately, I was away.
So on a newer building, this building was built in 2013, would you expect to see typical marketplace large influxes of money that the owner would have to put in within a 5-year initial startup, as
Well-
the subject property would be?
I agree. There's very little repairs at all would be required. My opinion is not really based on that. It's based on being in a big field that hasn't been developed for over 6 years.
Okay. Getting onto that comment, you're claiming that the area is basically an empty big field. There's a pretty large establishment right to the east of it, being Point Masada Group. Tim Hortons there. There's a number of car dealerships. There's also the development for the hockey iceplex.
I agree.
Would you not indicate that there is a large volume of traffic going in and out adjacent to this property?
Not adjacent. All the traffic, if you look at the pictures that you put, when you go in, your first right that you're gonna do, and it's all on the right-hand side, is all those auto malls. And those people that go to buy cars, they're going to a destination. So to get to this property, you actually have to go past in a road in the field, and then turn left and go further towards this property. So if you look at your rebuttal brief on page 9, you'll see that you can see the parking spaces a little bit to the very right. So the people have a couple entrances to get into those areas. You can see them on your rebuttal picture here too. And then you go past all of that, and they would go in because that's their destination. And then you go left, and you see, you go left, trying to remember how far, I'm thinking about a third of a mile, just a couple 100 meters before you get to the building that you've identified with the hand.
So basically what I'm saying is you have a large commercial development here with high traffic volume. You have a large commercial development here, recreational type traffic, and you have 2 access points getting into it in front of a subdivided and soon to be developed commercial development, a large commercial development. So you have 1, 2, 3 commercial developments, and they're on the adjacent to all 3.
I agree, but we
So-
shouldn't forget that we're trying to put ourselves in the mind of what a buyer and a seller would do as April 1, 2016, and what they would know as of that time.
Which is exactly my point.
So there, at that time, there's no development, nothing happening, and nothing foreseeably happening. Even the lease acknowledges it might take at least 10 years to subdivide.
So, getting back to what I'm seeing for quantum, your argument, you have no evidence, you have an unsupported opinion of value as far as capitalization rate and rent, to come to your opinion of value, which is reworked from the numbers which I submitted.
Well, that's more argument, sir. I think I've given my evidence on how I based the numbers.
That's all the questions I have.
Ed, questions?
Yes, I recall you saying that you thought the storage lab area was approximately 1/3 of the building.
That's, I'm just looking at the drawing here.
But did you, I mean, you have the drawings.
I
Did you at least do the calculation to find out?
From
what
this
the-
drawing, I can't do the calculations.
But
I
you have the
apologize.
drawings for the building.
I could have access to them, correct.
And did you actually measure the,
So I'm saying that I did not. I didn't take time to do the calculation, so I'm not in a position to say that it's more than 3,600 square feet.
all right, thank you.
I
That's
can
all
just
I have.
indicate on the drawing where it is, that's, because
Ron?
I visited.
I have no questions, Mr. Chairman.
And I think we've put Mr. Hackle through enough already from us. Thank you very much for your presentation, Mr. Hackle. You'll be hearing from us. And we're gonna take a little break, guys, about 10 minutes, I take it? Maybe a little longer, but 10 minutes for sure. We have to go move a car. move off on that one, so that's this. Just want to make sure I got the right property, that's this one. 15-1. It's been withdrawn.
Oh,
It's been withdrawn. And the next one will be 154 Provencher. Is that correct?
Please state your full name.
Svetlana Shevya.
And you swear the evidence about presenting the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, and nothing but
I,
the truth. Please state your full name.
Farmer?
And you affirm the evidence about presenting the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Thank you.
Well, when you're ready, we're dealing with the 154 Provencher. Roll number, please.
roll number 06-09-324-7900. Address 154 Provincial Boulevard. Owner Building Facilities Limited. The assessor roll 2019, reference date April 1st, 2016, assessed value 915,016 taxable property. Subject property located at 154 Provincial Boulevard on the east side of Tashi Avenue. The subject property is one-story medical office building with leasable area of 4,140 square foot and the full basement of 1,800 square foot.
Savannah, can I stop you there for a second?
Yes, sure.
Are you recommending that the burden of proof be placed on the applicant?
Yes, thank
In
you.
that case, we should be hearing, if you can explain why the burden of proof should be on him, and then we'll
Owner has
have
not-
him put his
Thank you
presentation.
for pointing. Owner has not complied with assessor request for an expense information made under section 16 Municipal Assessment Act. Requested burden of proof be placed on the owner pursuant to section 53 Municipal Assessment Act, and that any reduction in the assessed value of the subject property not take effect until the years following, the years for which the application related pursuant to section 54, 3.2 Municipal Act.
Are you challenging that?
I am indeed.
You are indeed? Do you have any questions?
I do. Ms. Shaver, could we turn to the very last page of your brief, please? Page on the back. So we've got a copy of the express post that was sent on June 3rd at the top of the page. And then at the bottom of the page, there is a copy of the, what I gather is the same express post that was showing as return to sender reason unclaimed, correct?
I don't see it, sorry.
So if you look at the very last page on the bottom, and you see the sticker on this express post,
Okay,
it says reason unclaimed, which of course indicates that it was returned to sender. Were you aware of that?
I didn't look so deeper.
Okay, so if we turn to the prior page, just on that point, if you look through the sequence of events as shown by Canada Post here, the delivery, or not delivery, but the item was sent in early June, but then if you go up through the sequence of events to June 13th, the final notice was sent out on June 23rd, item was unclaimed, and it says item being returned to sender. On the same day, June 23rd, item has been returned and is en route, and then on the 27th, the item was successfully returned to sender. So in fact, this item was not delivered, not picked up, and it was returned to sender to the city of Winnipeg, correct?
Yes, it's correct, but it's owner duty to provide mailing address.
Pardon me?
It's the owner duties to provide mailing address if something was happened, if it changed.
Owners, say that again, I'm sorry, I
Okay,
misunderstood.
we have mailing address to deliver
Mhm.
or our letters.
Mhm.
If something was changed, it's owner's duties to provide us about this information. We don't chase owners
Well, it's the
for
department's,
property.
It's the department's responsibility to deliver the request for information, especially in the context where they're gonna ask for penalties.
Yeah.
And if the item's returned to sender, Ms. Shable, I'd suggest to you that you need to follow up and figure out why it was returned to sender.
According,
Is this a question?
So, it's, the statement was made, so I'm suggesting, I'm putting it to you, Ms. Shable, that in fact, if it's returned to sender, that is not a valid delivery, and it would be incumbent on the department to follow up with the owner of record and see why it was returned.
Okay, are you aware of municipal board liquor decision?
I am aware of a municipal board decision, yes,
Same
indeed.
question.
So let's discuss
We
this.
don't,
Are you still asking questions, or are you going into your...
I'm done asking questions.
You're done asking questions? Have you got any questions, Ed?
No.
Ron, do you have any questions of the assessor?
No, not at this point, no.
So, Gildan Facilities is the owner of the property, is that correct?
yes, for in our records.
And your records show that it was sent out twice, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, let's get on to your presentation.
Mr. Chairman, I don't believe the record shows that it was sent out twice. The top envelope is a copy of the express post that was sent on June 3rd.
Mm-hmm.
The bottom, if you look at it, you see the sticker on the right-hand side that says reason and claim.
Mm-hmm.
That's the same request. And if you look on the previous page,
Yeah.
this is the sequence of events from June the 6th of 16 through to June 27th, but it all relates to that one request. It's just the way Canada Post is basically tracking.
Okay, so what's the first line then? Can you explain what the first, let's go through each line. 2016-06-27. That says signature image recorded for online viewing. What does that mean?
That means that it was recorded.
I'm asking her, not
Okay.
you.
Could you help me?
Sounds the way you read this, you should
Some
have
reason.
to go to the bottom up top.
That's the
And
same
that's
question.
a better tracking.
Item processed, item processed.
Mhm.
So it goes backwards.
I would like to record, we have a Richardson decision, municipal board about delivery of our request. It showed we don't have to follow them up.
Nope.
We just deliver it, that's it.
But it was sent once, not exact.
We're gonna hear from you and then we'll make our decision.
Mr. Chairman, I do have some brief response in reply to the department's position.
Why does that not surprise you?
And I have a recent decision of the municipal board that we were involved with as well.
Thank you.
Now, the facts, I'm going to be very, very brief on this. The department has sent out the mailing address to which they sent this express post of the 154 Provencher. 154 Provencher, Gildan Facilities was not in occupancy and hadn't been in occupancy of that property for many years. It was leased out to a third party. I can't speculate on what the tenant tenant's thoughts were, but certainly they were not Gildan Facilities, and they wouldn't be in a position to sign for Gildan Facilities. They were not held out as the agent or as having any authority. And in fact, as indicated on the face of the record, that the request was not signed for with return to sender. The municipal board decision, in my brief package, not the municipal board order, but the brief package that I provided to you, I do state that it was not delivered, returned to the department. The principals of Gildan Facilities have confirmed that they have no record of the receipt of the request for 14 or 15. There is an email that I have attached at the very last page of our materials, that, from Mr. Joel Bohemier, dated November 29th of 18, and he states to the, he confirms to Mark Brunitsky, who's the current property manager, that they don't have a record of receiving it. In the municipal board decision that I provided to you, it's municipal board order number 18275, the facts were similar, where the request in that case was marked as returned to sender, and the board stated in that case that before the deferral penalty would be applied, the board must be satisfied that a request was made and that it found its way to the owner on page 8, and as I'm suggesting is the case here, it was very clear that the evidence did not support the assessor's request, and the board denied the penalty. And you know, at the end of the day, if the Gildan Facilities is not even in receipt of these requests, which they're not, then the request for the penalty, of course, the fundamental premise of section 16 is that the request has been properly made, and it has not in this case. If the department, and I do know the department certainly follows up where they get their mail returned, which they have in this case, then it would be incumbent on the department to determine why, check the registered owner's address, and to find out why the requests, where the request should go to. And that was not done in this case, and at no point in time was the request actually received by the owner, and therefore requesting the application of the penalty provisions to be denied in this case. Thank you.
Questions?
Did you aware about Richardson decision?
I'm entirely aware, Ms. Shable, of Richardson. I'm very familiar with it.
It shows that we don't have to follow up.
Oh no, it says you don't have to follow up, but it also says very clearly the request must be validly made. If the department chooses not to follow up when the request is returned to sender, no request has been made. That's your decision, but then you can't ask for the penalty later.
No,
That's the
it
choice.
is decision we don't have to follow up. It's owner duties to provide
Ms.
proper
Shable,
mail
you're
and
misquoting
address.
Richardson. You're misquoting Richardson. Richardson says there's no duty on you to follow up, and that's absolutely right. But if you choose not to follow up when a request clearly has not been validly made, it is not appropriate for the department to ask for the penalties later on. Completely inappropriate, and that's what this decision says, this municipal board decision. If you look at page 10, let's look at page 10 where the board talks about Richardson. In closing, the board would like to highlight a comment in Richardson about the assessor's responsibility to exercise an administrative discretion depending on the circumstances of individual cases. If there is uncertainty whether a request was sent to the right party or to the correct address, or that it was duly received by the owner, the assessor may wish to decide not to raise a possible failure to comply. That's exactly the case here. Richardson, to be blunt, you're absolutely right in saying you have no obligation to follow up a second time, but if the request is not validly made, which was Richardson said, he is absolutely a prerequisite to this request, it is inappropriate to ask for the penalties.
Our record shows that 15 Provincial Boulevard, Builder Facility, mailing address 154 Provincial Boulevard. Mailing address was never changed. We sent our taxes, our information request. How they received our taxes bill.
I cannot answer that, Ms. Shable. What I can
But
answer
it was
is,
never changed by owner.
what I can answer is that the owner, as per the email he sent to me, has no record of receipt of the 14 or 15. They were not in occupancy of this property in 14 or 15, and the item that's marked was marked to Gildan Facilities in June of 2016, was returned to sender, was not received by the owner. The request I'm submitting has not been made.
But I don't see any records of change mailing address. And the taxes was paid, still was executed, showed same mailing address. full time.
I'm looking at your evidence, Ms. Shable, there was no revalid request has been made in this case.
It's our traditional request, we don't follow.
I'm sorry?
We don't chase owners.
And you're not obliged to, but if the record shows as being returned to sender,
That's why
there's
we
been no
asking
request,
for
and the
apply
request for
penalty.
the application of the penalties is inappropriate, as indicated in this municipal board decision, which specifically refers to Litchfield.
And this decision made in 2018, it's post reference date. We talk
It's
about
not evidence, Ms.
2011.
Shable. You raised the issue of the application of the penalties. This decision is effectively a principle, and it is not evidence, it's a municipal board order.
I will look into
No further questions? Ed, do you have any questions?
No, I understand the argument there. Are you using the same decision as a basis for your position?
it. No, we have another decision, Richardson.
Are you using the act?
Yeah, in my case, right now, I use act. What we have follow up.
And you were aware of this municipal board decision prior?
No, it's first time.
I don't have any questions of Mr. Reimer.
Ron?
Yeah, Mr. Reimer, you're familiar with this documentation here.
Yes.
So maybe you could just summarize it in your interpretation of what exactly transpired. And you had said that it was never sent a second time.
Oh, no, this is just all relating to
Okay.
one,
Okay.
so if one looks at the page you're looking at, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah,
uh,
you go from the bottom.
Exactly, from the bottom where it starts.
Yeah.
So June 6th of 2016,
Yeah.
the item is, I guess, being processed in Canada Post. June 7th, it leaves for delivery. That's the third row up.
Okay,
And then on the next row, attempted delivery, notice card left indicating where item can be picked up. So there's.
that's on the 13th. Right.
Well, that's originally on the 7th,
Okay,
the 1, 2, 3, 4,
Yeah.
fourth row up.
yeah,
And then, if one moves, and again, to summarize, on the 13th, another notice, and this isn't from the department, this is another notice relating to the same document that was sent on June the 6th. Final notice, item will be returned to sender in 10 days if not collected. So basically, they're saying, come and pick it up at the specified location, or we're sending it back to the sender. Then on the 23rd, which is 10 days later, item was, and now I'm sort of in the middle of that section, item was unclaimed by recipient, item being returned to sender. And then the next row up, it has been returned and is en route to sender. So again, this is the processing of this certified mail going back to the city of Winnipeg. And then on the top 4 rows, that then is confirming that the item was successfully returned to sender, being the city of Winnipeg.
mhm,
So it all relates to one and the very same request, and it tracks the package from the time it was originally sent to 154 Provencher to the time of it being sent back to the city of Winnipeg.
okay. So you don't know, after it is returned to the city, you lose track of it?
Well, then, yeah, whatever the
Yeah.
city did with it after that.
Yeah, you don't,
There's no.
okay.
Yeah.
And the municipal board ruled in this decision in August?
This was a decision coming out of the municipal board in August, correct?
Yeah. And can you briefly, summarize that?
Yeah, I can actually. The circumstances were very similar. In this case, the item, it was a tenanted property, as this one is. The item was sent to, the certified mail was sent to the property and was not signed for, and it was returned to sender and never found its way to the owner. And the municipal board in this decision very clearly states that is not a valid request and the penalty should be applied. So
Did they decipher what happened after it was returned to the city?
There's no way for anybody but the
Okay.
state to know.
Okay.
Yeah.
So-
Once it's returned,
So
it's,
they made the decision based on the tracking.
Exactly, exactly right.
Okay. I thank you.
But we received 2017.
Yeah.
How they received?
Because I can
How
tell
it
you
was
exactly, I
delivered?
can tell you exactly how Ms. Shable.
Without
in
changing
the-
mailing copies?
The management company that is now managing the property was not at the time that these requests were sent out, but that is now managing the property, is in fact checking the mail and making sure these things are taken care of. That was not the case back in 2015 when this management company was not involved. Notwithstanding that the building is actually 100% vacant, the mail is being tracked now. But that certainly was not the case back in 15.
So how long has the building been vacant?
It was vacated.
That was the chiropractor, correct?
Exactly right. Yeah. I think it was vacated in 20, actually, it would have been in late 2017 or very early 2018.
Okay, so in 2015 that we were talking, when this was all sent out in
2016.
2016,
Yeah.
they still had the chiropractor's office there.
The property had the tenant in it, yes.
The tenant was the Boeing-age, right?
Pardon?
The Boeing-age were there.
Yes, that's what their name was.
Yeah, and who owned the building then?
Gildan Facilities,
Gildan Facilities?
yeah.
And Gildan Facilities, I thought they were,
It's not the same people. Back in the early 2000s, it was them owning and operating,
Yeah.
and then they leased it out to another party altogether. That is not Joel, and not the people I'm referring to in my email and my rebuttal. It is not the same people at all. It was a lease to,
but Joel was involved in it.
my understanding was that once he leased it out to this third party, he was only involved as an owner, or maybe as working for him, but the lease was with an entirely different party altogether. Because the guy went dark, he went dark for not paying, right?
Mhm. But prior to that, they'd always received it there.
Well, when they were in occupancy, but I actually have the guy's name, the gentleman's name is Jared Buffy.
Yep.
So that's who ended up going dark in late 2017. And this is important, the municipal board, and I draw the analogy to the case at the municipal board. If I can ask the board and Ms. Shable to turn to page 9 of the municipal board decision, because there's lots of correlations between facts in this case and now. In the second paragraph, the board goes through this. In the board's opinion, mailing the 2011 and 12 first and second requests to the address for service does not prove they are duly received, nor does tracking information showing the 2012 second request was arrived at the address for service. In fact, return to sender stamped on the 2012 second request proves it was not to received by the owner. And then they go on to say, Litcherson recognizes there are occasions where an assessor finds it appropriate to send a request for information to an agent. So what the department was suggesting at that stage was that the receipt by the tenant should be sufficient. And the board specifically rejected that, and they said unless the agent is held out by the owner to have authority, the assessor must prove the request for information was brought to the attention of the owner. The 2011 second request was received by Mr. Zhao, who was the tenant. There is no evidence that the owner held out Mr. Zhao as its agent or was authorized to accept delivery on the owner's behalf. There's no evidence that Mr. Zhao brought the 2011 second request to the owner's attention. So in that case, the tenant actually signed for it, but he never got it to the owner, and it was very clear that it never got to the owner, and the board found that that was not a proper request. In our case, notwithstanding that Jared Buffy was in physical occupancy at that time, he didn't even sign for it, so it's a step removed even from that. So, again, I'm not disputing, Litcherson absolutely says that there's no onus on the department to send follow-up requests, and that's all well and good. But if they have a return to sender and they choose not to, it is completely inappropriate to then ask for the penalties and those services. That means no valid request has been made as required by 16.1.
But the taxes were paid in 15, 16. That means they received the bill at that address.
The only, and if they did so, then it would be a case, presumably if it was sent to 154 Provencher, then it would be a case where the tenant, Jared Buffy, looked at the tax bill and said, this is something that the owner needs to deal with, and forwarded it to him. But that's irrelevant. That is completely irrelevant. In this case, it was returned to sender, it wasn't even signed for. And even if Jared Buffy had signed for it and then done nothing with it, that would be exactly, that's even a step further along the process, that would be exactly what we found here where the municipal board said, you haven't made a valid request, Mr. Assessor. There was no information showing that it got to the owner. In our case, it didn't even get that far, it wasn't signed for, and I'm guessing that Buffy saw it was to Gillen Facilities and registered mail, and he thought, that's not me, so I'm not gonna sign for it, but I don't know that. But in any event, it was returned, and the owners, the Bohemians, have clarified or confirmed by the email that they did not receive those requests.
When did Mr. Buffy take possession of the building then?
He originally took possession in 2010.
2010.
Yeah.
And all previous documentation must have flowed to Gideon at that time. Because he didn't
Well,
have,
I have no idea.
we don't have a record of him missing prior to this, do we? Not that I saw. Usually we have a list given,
Well, there's the 14 and the 15, which is what we're talking about.
yeah.
I have no idea what it was going on for prior years. Now, Ms. Shables mentioned subsequent years, and I can tell you that's because the property manager is watching the mail and making sure these things get taken care of now, but that's not relevant to the discussion that we're talking about here.
Gideon Facilities was or is still involved?
With what?
They own the property?
They've always owned the property.
They've always owned
They
it.
just haven't been in occupancy since before 2010, or since Buffy moved
So
in
they
2010.
used to have that as their office?
Prior to 2010, they might have, I don't know. I thought it was Joel that was actually
I thought Joel-
practicing out of there.
He
up
was
until
practicing out of
2010.
there.
Yeah. That makes sense, but that again, as in this municipal work case, that all changed in 2010 when it was leased out. It was precisely the same in this case where it wasn't owner occupied, and then they leased it out to the Mr. Zhao, and it unfolded in a very similar manner, except in that case, Mr. Zhao actually signed for it and didn't forward it to the owner. In this case, the tenant didn't even sign for it. It was returned to sender.
Enough information? Should we go and have a little talk?
Yep.
We'll let you guys stay here and we'll go out. How's that? You feel nice we can do something? I just hate doing it on camera. Some lip reader. back to order. And the board will be denying the city's request. So we will let you go first.
The subject property located 154 Provincial Boulevard on the east side of Taché Avenue. The subject property is one-story medical office building with a leasable area for 4,140 square feet and the full basement of 1,800 square feet. The improvement was built in 1950. The land area is 9,994 square feet with surface parking. The subject property has zoning commercial. The district intend to accommodate more intensive commercial site. They do not have a local or neighborhood orientation. The district intend to include attractive commercial, institutional, recreational and service facility needed to support the surrounding neighborhood and broad their community. The high and best use its income approach. You can, on my page 2nd and 3rd, you can see air photo and street photos. On page 5, you can see my comparables. I find comparables for office retail buildings.
Page 5.
Oh, yes, on my page 5. Is it different?
Page 6, I think, your comparables.
Page 6.
So that's not. I presented 10 comparables, different location. I try select by effective years built. It's between 1965 and 1988. Floor building 1, 2, few of them on Taché because it's across of subject property. I have a 7th floor building. Lease start range present from 2009 to 2015. Our reference years April 1st, 2016. A different type of terms from 2 to 16 years old. Square footage between 1,200 to around 6,000 square feet. And you can see a variety of net rent. And average will be $17.45. In our estimation, we use $17.70 average. You can see my income approach. Yeah. We use square footage of 4,140 square foot. Came across potential rents around 71,000. We was applied 7% vacancy, 7% management, shortfall $7, and capitalization rates 6.5. So our estimate value of this building, this property, 915,000. On my capitalization rate table, it's in our bracket between, it's close to downtown. Suburban. between 5.25 to 8.50.
So which category are you referring to under your capitalization table?
It's a suburban area because it's still not, but very close to downtown.
Suburban A?
Yeah, it's very good location. Visibility has close to downtown and face Provincial Avenue. So in my conclusion, 2019 assessed value of 915,000 and good estimate of market value as of April 1st, 2016. The subject rent is reasonably supported by comparables, taking into account necessary adjustments, size, age, condition. The assessment is fair and should be confirmed.
Questions?
Yes, a couple, and then to clarify, I think I know why Ms. Shabor is referring to a different page number than Mr. Swatsky had, because this hearing was postponed, and so, Ms. Shabor, I think your page number references were in reference to the January 17th, which is exactly the same, except for, I guess there's a different ordering of pages, but this is the brief, to clarify.
I
for the
said
board
it 2
members.
times, yeah, in
Yeah, so
December
you're-
4 and 17.
Yeah, so when you refer, because the reason I'm saying this, Mr. Chairman, I want us all to be on the same page, as it were. I am referring to Ms. Shabor's copy.
There's a date stamp at the top.
Oh, good. The date stamp of January 3rd, and that was the reference that Ms. Shabor was making to her page number, so that we're all on the same. I can go back to the other one, which is exactly the same. It's, but just so we're all clear on what's going on.
We knew where to look.
Okay, good. Ms. Shabel, to clarify, so the department's got the leasable area is 4,140 feet then, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so now if we go to page 6 of your materials, which is the department's valuation, of that leasable area, though, 1,800 feet is basement area, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so the 2,340 square feet, that's the main floor area. Now, was the department aware that the entire building, main and basement, as of the reference date, was leased for $33,000?
No, we don't
Okay.
have any information about this building.
Okay,
It's my
so,
point, that's why we asked
I understand.
for this penalty.
So, in terms of the comparables.
Okay,
then-
I see your evidence.
So in terms of the comparables, on your page number 5, all of these comparables, none of these are basement space, correct? These are all main, and I know these buildings, so they're all main floor space, or in the case of 396 Taché, I think this is upper floor space, correct? Okay. So, have you had a chance, and I think I know the answer, but I'll ask the question, have you had a chance to inspect the property?
Matter of fact, yes, it was my chiropractor.
Was it?
until
Okay. Have-
2010.
Have you inspected it in its present physical condition for 2019? Okay. So it was your chiropractor, and so you were familiar with the main floor area. Had you ever been down in the basement?
Right now medical building under renovation. It started in April 6, 2018. When it will be done, we will inspect this building and update our records.
Okay, I'll be able to shed some light on that in a few minutes. Because I'm suggesting, Ms. Shaver, we're actually not far out on the main floor rent, and the issue is going to be the basement area. Now, on the capitalization, just to take a half step back, this valuation on page 6, and these are model-driven parameters, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So the 6.5% is a model-driven cap rate. And the department has provided you with a chart that lists the conclusions of the cap rate study, but no evidence to underpin how those conclusions were reached, correct?
No,
Okay.
it's analyzed whole information from whole city.
I'm sorry?
It's our model analyze information for whole city.
The last part I didn't understand, for
Okay.
model analyzing information for,
For city-wise,
okay, yeah,
so
no,
it's
right.
very big statistical.
Yeah, no, I understand, and this,
Analyzed and came to this
Yeah.
conclusion.
yeah, so what they provided is the summary, but not the evidence
Yes.
underpinning the
No.
summary.
It's
All right,
enough.
thanks, Mr. Chairman, those are my questions.
Ed, do you have any questions?
Let's see. No, I don't, thank you.
Ron?
I have none, Mr. Chairman.
I'm good.
Thanks,
On
Mr.
to your
Chairman.
presentation, please.
The crux, I'm gonna get to the heart of the matter, the crux of the issues under debate this morning are rent and cap rate, and within the rent issue, we're actually fairly close on the main suggestion for the main floor. I'm suggesting the basement is not capable of being leased independently. If I could ask the board and the panel members.
Do we have an ordinance package from Monday?
Mhm.
Where is it?
There's a couple, there's two.
It's right here, see, because
Yeah.
there were two
There's-
for
There's two.
assessment,
Yeah, this
and
would-
then
this would
it's
be-
Okay,
lease
yeah.
information.
Okay, yeah. Thank you. Now I was lost. We got it now, carry on.
So, page 5. The potential net market income and the, as I state there, as of the reference date, and as I had alluded to during my questioning of Ms. Shable, the property was leased at a net rate of $15 per square foot. That, though, to be clear, was based on the main floor area of 2,200 square feet. And the basement area, there was no additional rent charged for it. Certainly, I'm sure it was used for storage and such, but the lease was based on the 2,200 feet at $15 a foot, which equals a rate of $33,000 per annum. The original lease was based on a 3-year term that started in September of 2010. Then a 3-year option was exercised with a negotiated, and to be clear, it wasn't an option for a pre-negotiated, it was a negotiated renewal rate of $15 again for a period ending August 31st to 16. So what we're suggesting, Mr. Chairman, is the $15 rate for the main floor area, and that is consistent with the comparables that I've listed at the bottom of page 5 in the area, Provencher, Taché, Desmirons, Elizabeth, and Marion, so all in the general area, ranging from $18 a square foot down to a low of $11 a square foot. These are a mix of both retail and office and medical spaces, and there are some dental studios and pharmacy in there, along with insurance broker and again some retail establishments. This building would lend itself, of course, to retail or office or medical office uses, for that matter, as it had been, but certainly not restricted to a medical office use. Turning to page 6, the no discussion or debate concerning vacancy shortfall or the unrecovered expenses. For the cap rate, though, I'm suggesting the capitalization rate in this case should be increased to 7.50% for the reasons that we set forth in our cap rate study, which I'll get to in just a few minutes. We will apply the rate of 7.5% in our valuation, so if one turns to page 7 now, the tenant, Jared Buffy, is leasing at $15 a foot. That's what we're using based on both the rental rate in place and cross-reference with the market indicators. And they come in at a value of $379,000 using the cap rate of 7.5%. So in our appendices, and I asked Ms. Shable about the inspections, and I had an opportunity late last year in preparation for the original hearing of the matter that was to be held in December. Had an opportunity to go out and take a look at the property. I won't dwell on the exterior photos, but if one then turns to page 13. So at page 13, there are photographs of the main floor space, and the building is 100% vacant. It has been for certainly, if not all, virtually all of 2018. So page 13 is main floor area, showing the space as it currently exists. Page 14, again, page 15, more photos of the main floor area. And page 16, there's definitely some work that would need to be done in order to get it to a proper leasable condition. Page 17, at the bottom picture on page 17 is I guess the front desk as they had it when the chiropractor was still operating out of there. They haven't taken that out or anything yet. They just kind of left it as it was when the tenant was evicted. Page 18 is the last main floor space, and then going to page 19, and this is the crux of the debate concerning the basement space. So these are basement photos, and I'm not a particularly tall person, and my headroom in under those beams, I had to watch my head, so this space does not lend itself to any kind of rental value. And as it had been the case with Mr. Buffy, I'm suggesting that the basement would not generate any additional rent in addition to the main floor. So in that context, I will, just for the board's reference, I do have at page 23 a copy of the 2010 lease between Mr. Buffy and Gildan Facilities, and some pictures of my buildings of my lease comparables after that. With that $15 main floor rate, applied to the 2,200 feet, then I'm also asking for an increase to the capitalization rate. I'll cut to the heart of the matter concerning the cap rate issue. If one has reference to our capitalization rate study that was filed. And if we move to page 9 of the study, these are the capitalization rates that we've derived from looking at the income stream at the time of sale of these properties, and the property sale dates range from 2012 to 2016. They range from a low of 7.15%, and that was 1250 St. James, up to a high of 9.11% for 2211 Phillips. We're suggesting in this case the rate of 7.5%, which would be consistent with the majority of the rates shown there. The exception being the McPhillips Street, which appears to be at 9.11%, certainly significantly higher than the remainder of them. But we believe the 7.5% for this property would be fair, and for these reasons, we're requesting this morning a reduction in the 2019 assessment from $915,000 to $379,000. Thank you.
Questions?
This lease was signed in 2010.
The original term, that's right, the original term was a 3-year term in 2010, yeah?
In 2013 is our reference date, 2016.
Yes.
I have some comparables on the 396 Taché. If you can look on my number 6 and yours. Number 4 comparables. UB comparables start lease 2014 for 5 years, $16, and they also have lease 2015 for 5 years for $19.
Sorry, Ms. Shable, I'm just catching up with you here. You're talking about 396 Taché now?
Yes, 396 Taché. Your
Okay,
comparables
so yeah,
number
I have,
4
so my comparable number 4
and my number
is the
6.
16, and your number 6? Yeah, okay, that could be.
So it's $19 per square foot. You have good comparables to number 2, $17. You just prove our rent comparables and our rent applied by model, $17.76.
No, Ms. Shable, it's just not, 396 Taché is located directly across the street from St. Boniface Hospital, so that is going to command a much higher rent than a property out in Provencher. It's certainly the range goes up to that, but when one's looking at what we're classifying as a medical office clinic on Taché, medical practitioners who are at Taché Avenue are going to pay a premium for being at that location. That's a superior location, I'd suggest. But no disputing that, and I don't have that on my sheet, but if you're suggesting that on the main floor that was a $19 rent, I'm not going to dispute that.
No questions.
Ron? I have none at this point. Ed?
The basement, storage,
Yes,
you're saying there's no value there.
there is no additional incremental rental value, I'd suggest.
can't be used for storage?
It could, and it was when Jared Buffy was in there, but it was generating the rent of $33,000, which included both the main and basement. So I'm suggesting the rent, typically, unless it's finished out office space, it's very developed lower level finish, the basement storage is not included as part of the leasable area that the landlord is charging rent on. And that's the premise of my evaluation.
Well, the difference then between the 2,200 square feet you've indicated and the 2,340 square feet that the assessment department has indicated, is there a discrepancy there? And what's going on?
Mine would have been based on the lease, and that I cannot answer. That's a good question. Because my 2,200 feet was based on the lease. 2,340 is certainly the ground floor area that the department's got, and based on my inspection, I have no reason to believe that any part of that shouldn't be part of the lease. Well, I'd be comfortable with using 2,340 square feet in the $15 rate, notwithstanding the actual, which was less. On page 25, and I'm referring to the original lease now, it does say, provided monthly installments shall be subject to revision in the event that the architect certifies the area of the premises to be more than 2% greater or lesser than 2,200 feet. I can tell you that as a factual matter, no adjustment was ever made. But the department's records on especially a building like this, I would expect their records to be pretty accurate, so that's why I'm saying I'd be pretty comfortable with 2,340 feet.
And the cap rate,
Yes.
your rationale for going to 750 from 650,
Yes.
what are the factors?
Oh, in terms of, okay, so first and foremost, looking at the actual rates that were analyzed and specifically calculated on page 9.
Yeah.
And when you look at that, the condition of the building, in the physical condition we're assessing is for 2019, it needs work, certainly to get it to a leaseable condition after this tenant went dark. The location, which is, and I'll agree with Ms. Shabo, it's on Proventia, it's a good location. Not for, strictly speaking, a medical office where they're clustering closer to the hospitals and such, but for things like massage therapists or chiropractors or possibly a dentist or a general office and retail use. So the location is good. Condition, not so good. Location is good. The size of the building, it lends itself very well to something like it was, which was a chiropractor or a small practitioner. But anybody with any kind of volume of practice is going to outgrow that space pretty quickly. So it's not optimal in terms of size, but it certainly fulfills the job for that smaller segment. What that smaller segment, though, is going to result in is a lower ability to pay net rent. So I think the 750 strikes a balance when it was $15 rate based on market comparables and what was being paid. I think the 750 is fair in the context of these rates.
Okay, thank you. No further questions.
And no further questions.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. We got one left. 233. Oh, we're gonna have to take a recess again. I'm sorry. Somebody didn't pay for a full day.
Yeah, I know.
Shut it off on the way out. You gotta go across the street?
Yeah.
Okay. back to order. We're gonna be dealing with 233 Kennedy, when you are ready.
Roll number 120-975-26800, address 233 Kennedy Street, owner 7588-179 Manitoba Limited. Roll years 2019, reference date April 1st, 2016. Assessed value of $16,098,000. The subject property is known as a medical arts building located on 233 Kennedy Street, south of Graham Avenue. The property consists of a tower parking structure of 385 stalls and surface parking of 54 stalls. 55-story concrete formed structure with leasable area of 110,372 square feet, has two retail floors, has underground parking, and parking structure of to the east of the tower, fronting on Edmonton Street, plus surface parking, fronting on Kennedy Street. The subject property was constructed in 1961. I can acknowledge the currently building are under potential redevelopment as multifamily tower with retail space on 12 floors, but our reference date April 1st, 2016, it will be assessed as medical office building. You can see on my second, third, and fourth pages photo of building from different angles. I have 6 comparables for property lease. Okay. Property lease showed units on 3rd floor 7, 10, 14, 12. Was start lease date years 2014, 2015. Term lease was 7 years. Different square footage from 1,000 to around 5,000 square feet, with different net rent from $11 to $26. Property has surface parking and structure parking. So on my page 6, I presented table of comparable properties, 2015 reported rental rate for surface parking. It's on Lombard, Bannatyne, McDermott, Westbrook, Main Street, William. You can see range of monthly rent, for example, from $145 to $275. We have casual rent in stabilized net operation income per month. On my 7th page, you can see photo of exchange parking lot and structure comparables of location. It's on 170 Banat Avenue, has 32 parking stalls. You can have on 211 McDermott Avenue, 34 parking stalls. We have on 127 Banatine Avenue, 14 stalls with random range of $175 per month. On 129 McDermott Avenue, we have 116 stalls with random 165 per month. We have on 416 Main Street, 59 stalls, flooded stalls with $180 per month per stalls. On my page number 10, we have a parking lot for a specific subject property. They listed random roof $120, a random non-tenants $145. Yeah. And for our income estimation, we use a rent of $103.50. That's very well supported by presented evidence. On my page 11, I present rent comparable specific for building. Office building. Here are 7 different comparables on Portridge, Taché, Broadway, Notre Dame. Average years built from 1920 to 1975. Subject property has 15 floors. I presented between 7 and 11 floors buildings. Start rate between 2013-2015 with term of lease for 15 years. And different square footage from around 800 square foot to 1900 square foot. Depend of smaller square footage has higher rent compared to bigger square footage. It's range between $13 and $20, with average $16.12. For our, we use $12.29. It's very well supported by my evidence, and also for existing lease comparables for subject property. Medical office, we acknowledge that it's high vacancy. We apply 25%, it's maximum. It's our practice to apply for this type of building. This has problem with vacancy. Management 7%, shortfall $10, in capitalization rate $8.
8%.
8%, sorry, thank you, 8%. So just stream for medical building will be more as 8 million. On my page 17, I have 3 different streams for surface parking, structure parking in office building. First stream, it's 385 structure parking. Have estimation market step by step. Yeah. We apply for 75% and 5% for surface parking capitalization rate. Estimate value of structure parking will be more than 6 million. Surface parking 1.3 million, and office building 8.3 million. On my page 18, We have categorization rate table presented by City Winnipeg, Colliers, CBR, and Stevenson. You can see we applied 8% for office building. When Colliers, CBR, and Stevenson showed maximum 7.5%. In conclusion, the 2019 assessed value of 16,098,000, a good estimate of market value of April 1st, 2016. The subject reasonably supported, but comparables taken into account necessary adjustment, cites its condition. The assessment is fair and should be confirmed.
Questions, please?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Shable, just staying with page 17 and just for a moment. So the stream 1 and stream 2, which are the two parking revenue streams, those are all model driven, correct?
Yes,
In stream 3, it's model driven except, if I'm understanding correctly, the department has applied a 25% vacancy rate, correct? That would not be typical of model, the 25% is.
no, it's not typical.
Okay, so now, you made the statement that 25% is the maximum, but that's the department's policy and the department's policy alone, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you for that. So if we could please turn back to page 5 of your brief. We can agree that the subject, including the office building and the parking structure and the parkade underneath, obviously traded for $7.9 million just prior to the reference date, correct?
Could you repeat, please?
We can agree, in looking at the middle of your page 5 now, on November 5th, 2015, the subject, including the very asset we're talking about, including the parkade and the parking structure, traded for $7.9 million, correct?
Yes.
And on page 5, you've got some subject property leases. Were you aware that your comparables 1, 2, 3, and 5 are gross leases?
Okay.
You weren't. I gather that whatever the systems the department has provided to you, they didn't indicate that these comparables 1, 2, 3, and 5 were gross. They're listed as net, and I'm suggesting to you, Ms. Shable, that they're gross.
Okay.
Okay. So the net rents, the two net rents that are on this chart would actually be 4 and 6 at $11 and $11.50 a square foot, correct? If my suggestion is correct.
Yeah, you're right.
Thank you, Ms. Shable. Getting back to the vacancy briefly, was the department then aware, I take it we can agree in this case there's no issue with the information being submitted by the owner as to the rental and the income information, correct? Okay. So, was the department aware that the vacancy rate in 2015 was actually north of 50%? It was higher than 50% at that time?
Yeah, but it will be not forever.
I'm sorry?
It will be not forever, it's just temporary.
Well, okay, so I'll rephrase that. Was the department aware that with this medical office building, the vacancy rate had actually climbed from the lowest point since 2010 was 33%, up to over 50% in 2015 over a 5-year period?
Yes, we are aware, we know medical staff leave buildings, that's why we apply 25% to acknowledge it.
As part of the department's policy?
To acknowledge probably this building.
Notwithstanding that it was 50% vacant, the department's policy was to apply 25,
We
correct?
don't go over 25.
Right, as part of the department's policy. I'm
Because if it's
suggesting-
100% building empty, it will be demolished.
Well, we'll certainly be
It's
discussing,
redeveloped.
we'll certainly be discussing
Or
issues.
redevelop or
Yeah,
something.
issues related to
But
it.
25 maximum would be applied.
Well, is it based on the review of the income information that's been submitted, then the department was aware that in fact in 2014, if one removes the parking revenue, there was actually, from the building itself, there was actually a loss from operations.
Yeah, most of the revenue going for surface parking and structure parkings. Yeah, I will.
Okay. So, notwithstanding the department's policy of 25% and the, because if I'm looking back on your page 17, the net operating income that the department's suggesting for just the medical office tower itself is 670,000, correct? That's the model driven, using the 25%, but the rest of the model parameters, that's the indicated NOI.
Yes,
But the actual in 2014 was a loss from that income stream.
2014.
Yes,
Our reference date 2016.
I
It's not
understand.
relevant.
I understand, but if one reviews the income information, put it this way, Ms. Shable, at no point in the years leading up to the reference date did the office building generate even a third of that 670,000 to net operating income. Would you agree with that?
I agree that by current condition, under development for multifamily
well,
tower use.
And we can agree though, and you mentioned conditions, so I think it's important, Ms. Shable, we can agree the reference date is April 1 of 2016, correct? But we can also agree this is a 2019 appeal.
Yes,
So the physical asset to be valued is as it exists as of January 1st, 2019. Do you understand that
Yes.
distinction? Okay.
that I acknowledge
I
redevelopment.
understand. Okay, good. So we're all agreed on that point. Mr. Chairman, those are my questions. Thank you.
Ron? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Schlabel, I guess when you're evaluating properties, et cetera, do you take into consideration the sales that have taken place of the subject property?
We look on it.
So, you know, the fact that in 2006 it sold for $14 million. Okay. So when you're doing your income summary, in the back of your mind, do you have that in consideration that it sold at that particular time?
We analyze
Okay.
any sold.
So, so as you go along and you conclude value of $16 million for the subject property as at the evaluation date, the fact that it sold for, you know, $7,900,000 in 15, does that raise any flags or anything like that to you in regards to your evaluation?
Yes, we acknowledge it.
But, you know, does that have any bearing in regards to how you conclude value? I'm just saying that, you know, would you go to your supervisor or something like that and say, this is what I have, but, you know, this is what it sold? I mean, there's a vast discrepancy in regards to value.
Yes, it was sold in September 2015 for 7.5 million, 9 million, and planned to redevelop as its new amalgament Crown Corporation headquarters but it's never was approved by head office. That's why they resold.
So as an
So
assessor.
we following up, if something was sold, we looking into.
So as an assessor, wouldn't you be looking at this and say, there is something wrong here?
That's why we went inside and put a vacancy rate. Where we reduce rent.
But like you say, if it's a chronic vacancy problem, you know, the department's 25%, that's all legal goal, but as the applicant has simply stated that it's probably 50%, you know, vacancy at that time, so, you know.
It's not our policy to go higher.
Yeah, so I'm just saying, what are your thoughts? What are your thoughts in regards to, I'm concluding value of 16,000, but I see in the year before the valuation it sold for like $8 million. Do you find anything strange about it, or would you, you know, conclude value at still the 16, or would you say it be, you know, around that figure that it sold in 15?
Yeah.
I hate to put words in your mouth, you know, but I'm just,
Yeah, we
you
follow
know,
up what will
Yeah.
happen with this property because it was already
Yeah.
sold and was planned to redevelop.
yeah, but
Before
anytime that,
change all our
Yeah.
information, we need to wait
But
what
anytime you
happen with
put-
this property.
but anytime that you put value on a building, you sometimes do almost like a double check. And you say, is that correct? Is it reasonable?
Yeah.
So, okay, I thank you.
Ed?
This is a fairly old building,
Yes,
65.
and it's mostly vacant.
right now, because it's under redevelopment.
Is it under, are they gonna demolish it and then rebuild, or what?
No, it will be a multi-family towers
I
and
see.
retail space on 2 floors.
Okay.
From medical, it will be multi-family.
Medical to multifamily, is that CMHC or like
Mhm.
public housing or?
I'll be able to assist.
It's more, very more.
That's all the questions I have then, thank you.
Did you have an opportunity to look at the permits that are out at this time on the property?
Yes, that why I point for the developments because I see it in system.
Once the development is done in the next year and a half, 2 years, you'll be going in and doing another reassessment, will you not?
Yes, it will be change of building parameters. It will be not medical office anymore.
So you'll be changing,
So we will be reflect when it's finished. That's why we see sale, but we can't do anything before the development finish to do property adjustment for our records.
so you think, we know it's gonna get reassessed. The value in the condition it's at on April 1st, 2016, in the condition it was in.
Yeah, it's
You're
reflected
still driving
in
the
our,
you're still driving that $16 million hit.
because it's reflected in our rent. We reduce rent to $12 already. If my comparables showed around 16.
And you visited it, you said you went in, you saw the condition that the building was in, correct?
I saw picture of this building.
Is there a lot of, are there building permits, some of them being used to do the cleanup of the insulation in the building?
Yes, it's full, yeah. Window replacement, everything.
And the full rehab of all
Mhm.
the carcinogenics that are in the building? Correct?
It will be removed of interior diminution, wall, flooring, ceiling, window, enlargement, replacement, mechanical and electrical work.
So when we see the permits that are out for the removal of these products, and we see the sale value of $7-8 million, would that not have reflected the value accordingly for
Because
2016?
it will be reflected for our 2020 assessed
Mhm.
value. But right now, we're looking back in 2016, it was still medical building. And when medical people start to leave, we acknowledge it right away, reduce rent.
If I was building a new building from scratch, starting at the bottom, you wouldn't be taxing me till I was finished, is that not correct?
That's right. It should be occupied, it should be occupied, or it should be 2 years size moment you start to build building. It will be accessible.
This is almost a tear down and redo. I'm not following how you're staying at 16 million over this period of time and the condition the building's at today when it was up. I'm having a difficulty with that. Purchase price, the condition it was in, you see the permits that are out there. I'm having a difficult time seeing this $16 million value.
half of them for parking spots. Major revenue. Current.
I'll leave it at that. Let's hear your presentation.
On that very last point, we can agree. That's where the value is and was, the parking revenue, pure and simple. You've all touched upon, Mr. Chairman and the board members, you've all touched upon the very issues that I'm about to go into. The physical condition of the asset when it was purchased by Liquor and Lotteries in November of 2015. They bought it for $7.9 million. That physical condition through that time and the reference date and today is effectively the same, except, and this is what you alluded to, Mr. Chairman, the permits, and the permits aren't for construction, they're for demolition. And I'll be talking about that too. So this fundamentally, and you know, we've had debates in the past where we've questioned the department's policy, and they're entitled to whatever policy they want to have. All well and good. But this is a glaring example of where, and we've questioned this in the past, where you've got a vacancy issue that is much elevated beyond the 25%. The 25% does not reflect investor motivations, considerations, and the evidence, and that's exactly what we have here. So in that context, the request, Mr. Chairman, if we turn to page 2 initially, the request is to reduce this property, the assessed value for 2019, and sorry, I'm going to preface it with one more comment. The completion of the renovation, or the gutting it and the rebuilding it for multifamily is not going to be complete until sometime later in 2020 at best case scenario. So what we're talking about is this medical office building that's completely not feasible as a medical office building. So the request for the 2019 assessment is to reduce it to $8 million. If I could ask the board members and Ms. Shavel to turn briefly to page 4, property description. The property's land area is 60,505 feet. It is, of course, physically there's still this medical office building structure that is being redeveloped. The property is not going to be occupied as a multifamily development until 2020, and of course, as I've mentioned, the physical condition is fundamental to the valuation in this case, and we'll talk more about that and see some photos in a few minutes. Page 5, please. Now it's interesting, highest and best use. Sorry, I shouldn't have glossed over that. On page 4 briefly, under the highest and best use category, the highest and best use of the subject is not a medical office building. It simply isn't. That's exactly why the circumstances unfolded where Liquor and Lotteries bought it for $7.9 million to redevelop it, and why it's being redeveloped now for an entirely different use. The medical office building use was demonstrably shown to be not viable, and in fact in a losing proposition as time went on through the reference date. So on page 5 then, I talked about the vacancy rates briefly. I suggest that the days of medical practitioners choosing to occupy these small offices in large downtown medical office buildings had long passed. It was only typically the older practitioners that were choosing to remain in the subject in other similar buildings that we're very familiar with, Winnipeg Clinic and the Boyd Building, which also has plans for redevelopment. But as these physicians retired, there clearly have been no physicians interested at all in backfilling the space, and the vacancy rate for this building and comparable ones has simply been climbing and climbing and climbing since 2010. The trend for the subject since 2010, vacancy rate at its lowest was 33.68%, and as you can see there through the years, it actually went up to being north of 50% in 2015. That is actually consistent with even the Boyd Building, which was 65% vacant as of the reference date. And with the Winnipeg Clinic, they have a different ownership structure or a different business structure, but they were still, even with that much more favorable structure, in the 25 to 30% range. Turning to page 6, I'm suggesting that the debilitating effects of all of this, of the chronic, and increasing vacancies, was very evident when one looks at the income statements. The primary reason, and this is why I say we can agree at least on the parking revenue issue, the primary reason that the subject was even solvent at all was because of the parking revenue. When one looks at the chart on my page 6, once there's the management fees are inflated for 12, 13, and 14, so I've adjusted it to the typical 5% for unrecovered management. But when on the last column, if you take out the parking revenue, as you can see there, the net operating income being thrown off by the building itself was between, at its very highest, $332,000, but then going down to a loss in 2014 of $35,000. And that was obviously projected to just get worse because if one tried to continue as a medical office building, it was dying. Pure and simple, it was absolutely dying. So it's in all of these troubled circumstances that Liquor and Lotteries did step forth to buy this asset in 2015. And there's a reason I'm suggesting why Liquor and Lotteries bought it, because they had extremely ambitious development plans for it. And nobody else would be willing to take an asset with this kind of risk and sink that kind of money into it. And that was the only reason why they even paid $7.9 million. That would have been based on, I'm suggesting loosely, the valuation of the parkade component, and the rest being just purely as a net zero value and a redevelopment project for the property. So in late September of 15, 6 months prior to the reference date, Liquor and Lotteries bought it for $7.9 million. That included the tower and, of course, the surface lot to the north of the building and the parkade. When the MBLL bought it, it was touted as a significant component in the efforts to revitalize downtown and a move that would strengthen their workplace culture and generate cost savings. And as you mentioned, when they bought it, the vacancy rate was well over 50%, and obviously that's a debilitating rate to try and carry the building. So Liquor and Lotteries' plans for the property was extremely ambitious, as I mentioned. They wanted to redevelop and expand the first 5 floors, which would actually have added 70,000 to 80,000 feet of space. They plan to have retail and other businesses on the main and second, and then Liquor and Lotteries offices on the 2nd through 5th, along with a daycare. And then turning to page 7, general office space on floors 6 through 15, not medical office. That mold and that physical layout was completely dysfunctional, but their plan would have been to gut it as well and redevelop it into functional office space. And the centralized office for Liquor and Lotteries for 400 employees. Their projected cost to just redevelop this asset were $66 million. $66 million they were gonna put into the project, and based on all of that, what amounts to publicly funded or government organization putting that kind of money into it, based on what was actually happening, they paid $7.9 million, which I would suggest represents the upper end of what anybody would be willing to pay, because they had resources available to them at that time that very, very few entities or parties would have. So that asset, as I mentioned, the asset they bought for $7.9 is what we're valuing for 2019. Now, I'm going to go through the photographs, but again, I'm referring to the fact that the physical asset in all of 19, and chances are very well into 2020, are going to be what Lotteries bought. And it's on that basis, given that purchase price of $7.9 million, that I'm asking the board to reduce the value to $8 million for 2019 this morning. Page 8. It was actually quite striking to me when I looked at what was happening with the property and what Liquor and Lotteries paid. That $7.9 million price is extremely close to the department's valuation looking at the parking revenue. It's within a couple of $100,000 of each other. So that, to me, and it stands to reason, because the building operations, the tower operations itself were actually bleeding money by the time the reference date was hitting. So that makes perfect sense, and it certainly reinforces the fact that for our purposes for 2019, the $8 million makes a lot of sense. I'm on page 9 now. Again, I'm mentioning the purchase price being entirely consistent with the lack of performance in the medical office tower, and the parking revenue being the only thing keeping the thing solvent, the vacancy rate being north of 50% and increasing. Notwithstanding the department's policy, I'm suggesting that's exactly the kind of analysis that Liquor and Lotteries did, looking at a 50% vacancy rate, not some notional 25% rate, but what was actually happening, which is what any investor would do, and resulting in the $7.9 million price. So starting at page 11, there's photographs. I had an opportunity to inspect the property with the contractor that's working on it. So page 11 is the main floor. Page 12 is where it really starts to show the work that's in process right now at the bottom of page 12. Second floor, there's a little lobby area that they haven't got to yet. They will, page 12. And then onwards from page 12 all the way through page 22. These are all the photographs of the spaces that are currently in process for being demolished. You can see the physical condition as you leaf through the pages. They're in various states of demolition, and that demolition will be continuing throughout 2019 in order to gut it back to bare shell, and then, having remediated the issues, Mr. Chairman, that you've alluded to briefly, that I won't get into, but having done that remediation, then to properly redevelop it in 2020 and ultimately sometime in 2020, hopefully make it capable of occupancy as a residential building. And it's of course at that stage, as both Ms. Shable was acknowledging, Mr. Chairman, you had alluded to, it's at that stage when you value the property as a redeveloped asset, but certainly not before. So with all of these, this physical condition, the property trading for $7.9 million, and the situation involved with the property and the extremely distressed nature of the asset, the medical office building asset, I am requesting a value of $8 million this morning. Thank you.
Questions?
No questions.
Ron?
Mr. Reimer, you didn't do an income approach at all?
It would have resulted in a net. The closest thing I can suggest is on page 6. The net operating income from the building was less than 0. It didn't make sense. The value of 7.9 was consistent with the parking revenue, actually very consistent with it. That's what makes sense. The building itself was bleeding and it would have been increasing at that time.
Do you know what the renovations might cost?
What the renovations, no, I can tell you that the demolition is going to be in the $1 million to $1.2 million range, but as far as the new, once they fill it all back out again, and late this year and going into 2020, that's yet to be determined.
Yeah.
That's not. what
You
we're
had mentioned
supposed
something
to
about 66 million?
That's that was the lotteries.
Yeah.
When they bought it, that was their plan.
Okay.
This is entirely different. They were planning on redeveloping it for their own purposes as an HQ and then adding office on top. The redevelopment that's currently underway is to redevelop it, not as an office at all, but as a multifamily.
Totally changed the plan.
Yeah.
But those costs are yet to be determined. They're still in the demolition stage and will be for some time.
And right now, they're just gutting it?
Exactly, as
Okay.
per all those photographs, yeah.
Yeah.
So they haven't got to all the floors yet, but they're working their way through it.
So do they have to take work permits out or anything
Oh, yeah,
like that?
absolutely. So the permit, that's why I say the permit just to demolish is north of $1 million.
Okay. I thank you. That's all I have.
Ed?
Thank you.
So what kind of residential is going in there? Is it
It's a standard multifamily.
No, it's not
Yeah.
public housing.
No,
It's,
not unless there's a structure that's going to be in place that I'm not aware of, but certainly having spoken with my knowledge of the file, it wasn't going to be public housing.
Okay, it's not senior something or anything like that?
Don't believe so. That's a question I haven't asked though, but I don't believe, I think it's meant to be just a jumping on the downtown, live and work downtown bandwagon.
Okay, thank you. That's it.
It's still owned by lotteries.
No.
Oh, they sold it now?
They did.
They sold it again?
Yeah.
In
They sold it with
2007,
reference.
Well, we don't want to talk about what they have to sell.
You're not allowed.
Huh?
You're not allowed.
That'd be
Post
probably a lot
reference.
less.
Double. It was sold.
Well, as you had stated that, just valuing the parking lots, I mean, that's,
That's-
close to the 8 million.
That's what-
So the rest of the square footage, which is over 100,000, I mean, it's a given.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
lotteries was, they have, obviously had, at the time, under that government, they had ambitious plans. And, but it was, as I say, striking to me that their value of 7.9 matched up very, very closely to the department's parking revenue, and that makes perfect sense. Makes perfect sense.
Thank you.
I'm done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all for your time.
Look at that, we might be out of here by now. Oh, shit. Shut it down.